Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to start us off today with a reading of scripture. Are you ready for this? Open up your Bibles to Psalm chapter 118, verse 24. This is the day that the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Mm, mm. Hi, hello, and welcome into episode number 129 of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. My name is Austin Elmore. Thank you for being here. However, you got here, wherever you're listening to this podcast, or perhaps even watching it on YouTube. I'm going to start, I don't do this often, by asking you, wherever you may be, however you may be enjoying this podcast, to leave a like, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and maybe, just maybe, even share it with one of your closest friends. Or maybe even just a random person on the street. If you see them, just say, hey, there's this podcast. It's called Ball Don't Lie. And today he started with a scripture reading. We'll get into why I started with that in a moment, but I've kind of been starting these episodes going off on a short tangent, and I'd like to do that again today. I'm recording this on Wednesday, March 18th. We're just a couple of hours away from the beginning of the NCAA Men's March Madness tournament. Don't sue me for saying that. I'm allowed to say it, right? Anyways, we're about to start that tournament. And there was a lot of hubbub about the fact that North Carolina got into the tournament. They probably weren't really deserving. There was a lot of hubbub about the fact that Bubba Cunningham, the athletic director at North Carolina, is like the chair of this selection committee. There was a lot of hubbub about the fact that Louisville was given an 8 seed despite finishing the AP top 25 as the number 10 ranked team in the country. That didn't seem to be right. And people are all mad about the NCAA March Madness selection process. And this is something we're used to with football, certainly in the college football playoff. I don't understand why they don't. The NCAA is bloodthirsty. They're hungry for money all the time. Why not sell that? Why not make that a TV show? Why not make the selection process? You've got all these ADs in there, or whoever is all in there. You've got them mic'd up, you've got cameras and so on, and you see the conversations they are having that allow them to explain themselves about why they are choosing this team and why they're seating them this way. Like, how could that be hurtful? If you open up the door to the entire process of how it's supposed to work, and also if you're worried about, misbehavior or people doing things they're not supposed to do, you know what would stop that? If there were cameras and microphones there to police it and make sure people are on their best behavior, that it's not all behind closed doors. You could make that into great television. That would be an easy opportunity for college athletics to make a bunch of money like they always want to do, and also be more transparent to the selection process. Now, eventually, I mean, it's not really going to matter if they're going to expand the NCAA tournament to 76 or 78 or 72 teams, which I think is asinine. It's not really going to matter because everybody's going to get in. It's all going to be pointless. But I don't understand how that's not a thing. How is that not a thing? Especially in gambling in today's day and age, why are you not being more transparent, more open, allow the access? What could you possibly be afraid of? Prove, if you're Bubba Cunningham, prove that you weren't in the room when they were discussing North Carolina. Like, how hard could that be? Surely it's not that difficult. I wouldn't think so. That's my tangent for the day. The big news of the day. Just a couple of hours ago, as I'm recording this, it became official. The Bengals signed T. Higgins and Jamar Chase to long-term contract extensions. Higgins gets 4 years, I believe $112 million guaranteed. It might be 115, something, not guaranteed. 4 years, $115 million, upwards of 80 guaranteed. Jamar Chase had a 4-year, $162 million deal with over 110, 111, 112 guaranteed. The guarantees for Jamar's contract go deep into the contract, including into the 4th year, which is completely abnormal from what we're used to seeing for the Bengals. Higgins' contract, his guarantees go into the 2nd year, again, deviating from the norm from what we're used to seeing for the Bengals. For the last couple of weeks, I've been frustrated. You've heard it in my voice. I've said it openly, not only on this podcast, but also on our show on ESPN 1530. It's called Cincy 360. I've been angry because the Bengals, in my mind, missed a big opportunity to get these deals done and let that pave the path and set the path for you in free agency. And while I am ecstatic that these two guys are going to be here for the long term, I still have questions about the construction of the roster. But now's not the time for that. We'll get into that over the course of the summer as we are going over this roster and trying to figure out what makes sense for them in terms of putting a football team on the field, how they execute, and how they improve. We'll also get into that with the draft. The important thing right now is the fact that we once again can write down another moment in which the Bengals deviated from what we came to know as the norm for the better part of the history of this franchise. There is nobody on planet Earth who has defended this team more over the last 5 years than me. On the air, on the podcast, in private conversations, all over the place. I truly believed after the drafting of Joe Burrow that this organization turned a corner. I've said that a lot. But I'm not going to lie, over the last month or so, doubt has started to creep in. I've doubted myself. I've doubted the takes that I've had. I've doubted the belief. I've doubted my sources. I've doubted a lot because you couldn't help but wonder, gosh, are the Bengals going to screw this up? Surely they're not going to screw this up, right? Because life in the NFL is short, man, and Super Bowl windows are not open for very long. And you try your best to just enjoy the winning because winning is freaking hard, man. It's hard. And you never really know. You couldn't really tell with the Bengals. Are they in a spot right now where the window is closed? Is it fully closed? Is that where we're at with this team? I didn't want to believe that. I didn't think that. And I just didn't want it once again to reach a spot where Jamar is holding out and Higgins is unhappy and who knows with Trey Hendrickson. And I waited to record this podcast today because I thought maybe, just maybe, there'll be Trey Hendrickson news. I'm not sure when that's going to resolve, but it does look like it's at the very least trending in the right direction for the Bengals. We can talk about that at a later date. But the most important thing here is that through the 2028 season, T. Higgins is a Cincinnati Bengal. Through the 2029 season, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are Cincinnati Bengals. Now, you might question the way a roster is built by shelling out a lot of money to those three players, but you look at this Bengals roster, there's not anybody really on the team that's going to be getting big extensions in the future. There's a bunch of young players, a bunch of rookie players, a bunch of guys that are, quite frankly, question marks moving forward. And the salary cap will continue to go up. It'll be north of $300 million in the next couple of years, which tells me this is the right time to do these deals. And the Bengals will not be bit in the butt. You never know what injuries are going to look like, but the Bengals will not be bit in the butt by these two contracts. This is the foundation of who they are. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. They've drafted a really good running back in Chase Brown, still have work to do on the offensive line. And the defense, as we know, trying to figure that out and kind of sift through the bodies that are left on that defense at the moment. But the foundation, the identity, the franchise is on those three. Jamar Chase is the best wide receiver in the National Football League. And quite frankly, I believe, pound for pound, Joe Burrow is the best quarterback in the National Football League. I don't think anybody played the position better than Joe Burrow last year. And I'm not just saying that because I'm biased. I'm not just saying that because I'm a homer. I'm saying that because I watch a lot of football and I'm always just trying to figure out what are the best doing and how are they doing it. I truly believe Joe was the best in the world last year. Truly believe that. You can say whatever you want, but when you have a guy like that, you have a chance. And when you surround him with two of the best receivers in the world, you have a chance. Earlier today in the press conference, it was brought up that it was the highest paid number 2 wide receiver of all time for T. Higgins. And Jamar Chase interrupted and said, no, it's 1A. It's not number 2, it's 1A. And Higgins said, I wish they wouldn't have labeled it like that. I don't want to be known as a number 2. I don't want to be known as a number 1. I want to be known as a great Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver who comes in every day and grinds. What an awesome attitude to have from a professional athlete, a guy who just made life-changing money, a guy who got a little misty-eyed in the press conference talking about how his mom doesn't have to worry about anything ever again. a guy with a long story, a painful story, lost his father, his mom had suffered through addiction. There's some pain there. And in that moment, and as it's all soaking in, to see T. Higgins say, I don't want to be labeled this or labeled that. I just want to be known as a guy who's great at what he does and comes in and works hard. How awesome is that for T. Higgins and the Bengals? How awesome is it for Bengals fans that once again, Cincinnati has invested in their best players? They've done it with Joe Burrow, they've done it with Chase, they've done it with Higgins. Big part about this is I've to kind of circle back to my point about the multiple times that they have changed. This is another moment. I one of the early podcasts when I came back to doing this was, yes, the Bengals have changed a lot, but they have to evolve. And so this experience right here with these wide receivers is part of that evolution. Because yeah, in the past you've given out some good contracts and you've had good wide receivers and AJ Green and Chad Johnson and TJ Hushmanzada and Chris Collinsworth, and you've had all these great players over the course of your career or over the course of the history of your franchise. But are you going to deviate in contract structure so that it allows you to keep the window open for as long as possible? And we saw that that is the case with the Bengals. Guaranteed money later in years, base to bonus. I guess I don't know the words. I've meant to do that last week and I still didn't find the words. But those ability to convert base salaries to signing bonuses to create cap space. The reason you want to create cap space so you can build out the rest of the roster. This is a big, big moment for this franchise. And today to have both of them on that podium together talking about how they wanted to be in Cincinnati. Think about that for a moment. A franchise that was once the doormat of the National Football League, a laughingstock. There was the lost decade of the 90s, a franchise that has been known for being stubborn, behind the times, cheap, and at times incompetent. All words that I've used to describe them, and thousands of other people have used to describe them. And here they are, the most talked about team in the National Football League, with one of the most popular players in the NFL at quarterback in Joe Burrow, with the best wide receiver on the planet right now in Jamar Chase, and all these guys, homegrown guys. Now you can say, well, the Bengals suck so bad that they got Chase and Burrow in the top 5, and you would be right about that. Higgins was the 33rd pick, first pick of the second round. I get it. I get what you're saying. But they've been able to develop those players, find success with those players, and now retain those players. Listen, it's crazy to think about the timeline here. And this is probably the most important part about this, because they kind of shot this down in the press conference today, but I don't know if I entirely believe them. So let's rewind to a year ago, okay? Higgins wants a contract extension. The Bengals don't give it to him. They place the franchise tag on him. T says, okay, I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to show up every day. I'm going to work, and I'm going to prove to you that I'm worth the money. So he does. And, he doesn't participate in every single team drill during training camp, but he shows up. He's got a couple of injuries. That happens over the course of a season. But Higgins, in the biggest moments, repeatedly has showed up in big games. He's gone out there hurt. He's tried to play hurt. He's proven to the Bengals that he's going to give everything they have. And he grew up a Cincinnati Bengals fan. So this means a lot to T. Higgins. So a year ago, Higgins plays on the tag, and the thought was, at the time, his agent was David Mulligetta, who notoriously is a tough negotiator and a guy who does not see eye to eye with the Bengals. But a year ago, they placed the franchise tag on Higgins, and everyone's thinking, all right, this is it. One last opportunity with Burrow, Chase, and Higgins to go win the Super Bowl. And then the Higgins or the Chase negotiations began last February. They didn't get anywhere. And right before the season, Jamar's like, all right, I'm done. I'm walking away. I, too, am going to bet on myself. Now, we've talked extensively about how the Bengals screwed all that up and should have paid then, and now they had to pay more for it now. But that's not the point here. The point here is that both of those guys went out and bet on themselves. And from a few of the sources that I've talked to, it was pretty apparent early on that this team was not going to be good enough in 2024. They just weren't going to be good. Burrow knew that almost right away, and he was angry. And I think it's part of the reason why he played like Superman all year, They got off to a slow start. They weren't good. He was unhappy. Jamar was pissed about his contract. There was a dark cloud hanging over the locker room. They knew they were basically useless on defense. This team was not in a good spot. And so over the last 5 games of the year, starting with this Monday night game in Dallas, the Bengals find a way to win a game, thanks in no small part to a mental error by the Dallas Cowboys. And after the game, Joe Burrow goes out in the press conference and talks about how important T. Higgins is to the Bengals, how he wants T. Higgins back, and how T. Higgins is a need, not just a want. We also, around that time, find out that T has changed his agent. It's no longer David Mulligetta, it's Rocky Arsenault. Rocky Arsenault, of course, the same agent that Jamar Chase has. So, and Rocky also, by the way, experienced with the Bengals in the past. Rocky's been negotiating for contracts for a long time, including big wide receivers that the Bengals have had in the past. So there's experience there, and you think, okay, that's noteworthy. For the first time, it's like, wow, the quarterback has come out and said he wants this guy back, and he's changed his agent. This all feels like a move to come back to Cincinnati. It seems like that's what T. Higgins wants. That's interesting. And then over the last several weeks, every single game, you go out the team captains, it's Burrow, it's Chase, it's Higgins, and they keep having good games. They win the last 5 games in a row. They just missed the playoffs. Burrow repeatedly over the course of that time is saying, I want T. Higgins back. I need Jamar Chase back. We have the money to get all this done. Goes to the Super Bowl in New Orleans, does the same thing, repeatedly says it over and over and over again. Now all of a sudden there's this momentum to say, oh, crap, maybe this is actually what they want to do. Maybe there's a way to make this happen. And as you heard on here, I've expressed my doubts plenty of times, right? But it seems like they came together and said, listen, nobody else on this team is a building block. It's just us 3 and Trey Hendrickson. And even then, I would say you could come or go either way on calling Trey a building block. But you look at, they probably looked around and said, it's us 3 that are the building blocks of this team. If one of us goes, it's going to be really, really hard to keep this thing together. And so what appears to have happened is that Rocky Arsenault, the agent for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, went in to begin negotiations this offseason and said, listen, it's not just one or the other. It's both of them or neither of them. And what a position to put the Bengals in, because they know they can't lose Jamar Chase. They cannot do that. That would piss off Joe Burrow. It would piss off the fan base. It would be organizational suicide. And now, if you're going to lose T. Higgins, then guess what? That means you lose Jamar Chase, you lose the fan base, and you probably lose your quarterback. So genius negotiating, genius leverage by Higgins and Chase and Burrow to say, hey, go in there and make this a package deal. And you know what? Good on the Bengals for realizing it, looking around and saying, you know what? They're kind of right. We don't have anybody else to build around. We got to start with these 3. Will it win us a bunch of games? I don't know, but it will be fun. And there are worse foundations to have than 3 of the best players in the NFL. Good for the Bengals for realizing that and then stepping up to live by their word, follow their word, make good on their word to make Jamar the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. It was pretty easy, Jamar said today after Myles Garrett got his deal done. And then Jamar said repeatedly today that every time he'd talk to Rocky, he was checking in on T's deal. He wanted T's deal to get done first. Those 2 are truly a package. They're best friends. They're close friends. And when you have something like that, that's a really, really good start. You can have conversations all you want about the roster building. And like I said, we'll get into that over the summer. But there are worse places to start than 3 of the best players in the world. And I said to someone recently that this offseason was kind of all about finding how much power Joe Burrow has. Because never has there been a player more influential in the history of the franchise than Joe Burrow. The Bengals are known for the fact that they don't give a lot of power to the players. They are known for being very tough negotiators. They are known for winning contract negotiations. They are known for not making life easy on anyone who's trying to get a buck out of them. And Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase just went in there and played chess and whooped their ass and forced them into doing things they don't normally do. Now, is there going to be retaliation for that? I hope not, but that's something to keep an eye out on. And you would hope more than anything that the Bengals have learned their lesson throughout all of this, throughout getting dragged through the coals on social media, throughout getting called out publicly by their quarterback, throughout I know thousands of season ticket holders leaving, that maybe, just maybe, they learned something. Oh yeah, we're supposed to do things this way. We have to evolve to stay at the top. I said it last week. No one's defended them more around from the they don't want to win allegations than me. This is an indication that you want to win. This is an indication that you're willing to do things that make you uncomfortable in order to win. Now, you might be saying right now, on paper, they're the same team as they were a year ago. What's going to change? And that's a good question. That's what we don't know the answer to yet. And they don't play until September. So all we can do right now is play the games on paper until then and try to figure out how this is all going to add up into making a better team in 2025 than they had in 2024. But make no mistake about the enormity of today. Chase and Higgins, long-term deals, guaranteed money past year one, and the foundation solidified with Joe Burrow. That is a commitment to your fans. It's a commitment to your players. It's a commitment to your quarterback. And it's a commitment more than anything to winning. That messaging from the Bengals is huge. Now, here's something I'm a little bit bothered by. I don't know that I even say I'm bothered by it, but something I'm intrigued by is how often people care in Cincinnati and Bengals fans, how often people care about what the national media thinks. I could probably do an entire episode on this, but let me just try to explain something to you. For most of their existence, the Bengals have been a joke of a franchise. For their entirety, they've lost more games than they've won. They have this reputation of being cheap and stubborn and stuck in the past and stuck in their ways. When you do that for 30 or 40, 50 years, that's going to have an effect on the way people view you. And until you do all the necessary things to change, they're always going to see you through that lens. You have to prove to people that you've changed. And one of the things about national media, and especially in today's day and age, the talking heads out there, the Stephen A. Smiths, the Chris Cantys, the Bart Scotts, those people don't really know what's going on. They read headlines, they read box scores, they might read an article, they're fed some information by a producer. They don't really know. Everything they say should be taken with a grain of salt. If you're debating certain topics and you're having certain arguments, then fine, it makes sense. You know, they can make some really good points and they can make you think, and there's a place for that. But when you're trying to analyze the people inside an organization, the way an organization works, those people don't have relationships with people inside in Cincinnati. They have no idea what's going on. And so they only view them through the lens that they've always known. There are two ways to fix this. Number one, do things like sign your big star wide receivers to big contracts and pony up the cash, and also win football games. The Bengals have been doing that, and slowly but surely the perception has been changing. And you're never going to make everyone happy. There are always going to be ignorant people. Everybody out there has one of these, a podcast. Everyone out there has YouTube shows. Everybody out there has an opinion. You're not going to make them all happy. And my plea for Cincinnati fans and for Bengals fans is to not pay attention to the people that don't have a relationship with the truth. If you know the truth, if you know the way things work here in Cincinnati, if you know based on the wonderful local coverage that we have, or the people that are the Bengals content creators that make really good information and create all these different ways of understanding the salary cap or roster building or draft evaluation. If you know all that and you have a relationship with that truth, then why are you bothered by the opinion of a talking head in the national media? There are a few people out there that are really well informed, really smart, and their analysis is beneficial and helpful. There are other people out there that just don't know what they're talking about. And when you have a relationship with the truth, it's easy to see who those people are. So you just don't pay them any attention. That's the most important thing here. Know the truth and then use that to decide who you listen to and who you don't listen to. It's really quite simple. And there's no reason in being mad about what somebody might say about the Bengals. Here's another thing. There's a difference between, these studio talents and talking heads, the Stephen A's, Smiths, and people of the world. There's difference between those people and NFL insiders. Those people, like NFL insiders, don't have a favorite team. 99% of them don't have an agenda. They're not trying to push anything. Most of their conversation comes from agents. Agents give them access. They tweet out some stuff and they keep everybody happy, but they keep getting information. A lot of those NFL insiders, they have relationships with people in Cincinnati. They have relationships with people in the building. They are worth listening to and watching and following for the most part. The people that are just up there yelling at each other, they're just up there yelling at each other. And the other thing is, one thing that's unique about the Bengals and their fan base, they're extremely active on social media, extremely active, and they're extremely engaging. And that sort of thing can make you easily manipulated. If a producer or a talk show host or whoever it might be, if they all know how you're going to react to something, well, then guess what? They're going to use that against you. They're going to manipulate you. They're going to use the buzzwords, or they're going to use the certain headlines or whatever it might be to try to get you to react. Because people being engaging and getting impressions and having conversations and calling you out and continually boosting up your content, that's good for business. So don't fall into that trap. The other thing is, and this is a fair point, that the media perception of the national media perception ultimately becomes public perception. And that to an extent is true, because there are too many people that's all they see, that's all they hear, so that becomes their opinion. However, again, have your relationship with truth and act on it. Don't worry about what other people do or what other people think. There is one valid point to this, is that Hall of Fame voting, it is often driven by the national media. And those people end up voting in local media. The Hall of Fame voting process, there are multiple guys from Cincinnati and Bengals players that should be in that are not in. And much of that has to do with the Bengals have not done a good enough job celebrating their own players, but also for years they sucked. So when they sucked, they weren't in the national spotlight. And I'm in the belief right now, when it comes to great players eventually getting in for the Bengals, all publicity is good publicity. That's truthfully my belief. The Bengals are the most interesting and most talked about team in the National Football League. And then when that's the case, and then you publicly do the right thing over and over and over again, well, then guess what? People are going to change the way they view you. Having constant public discourse about the franchise and about the great players that play for the franchise, and then taking care of them with great contracts, that's good for the Bengals. And when you have this raucous, engaging, and unique fan base on social media, well, you should be careful insulting and going after the media on social media, on Twitter, on X, on Instagram, whatever it is, because eventually those are the people that are going to be voting on the guys that are playing now as Hall of Famers. So just keep that in mind when you treat people the way you might on social media, because it's all connected. And more than anything, have a relationship with truth and let that guide you to who you get your content from, who you get your information from. Let that be your guide. That ultimately is the most important thing. And that goes for beyond, it goes beyond sports. That goes in every part of life. And it's something that bothers me a lot, because I think in Cincinnati, we've always had this idea that we're not taken seriously. Some call it Napoleon syndrome, the little brother syndrome. I think there's a little bit of that. But you have to also understand there haven't been a lot of reasons to be taken seriously. Until you start winning, that's the only way you get people's attention. And you have to win consistently over time. You can't just be a flash in the pan. You can't just be, a blip on the radar. You've got to be consistently in the conversation. And right now, we're going on year 6 of the Bengals being in that conversation. That's a good thing. All publicity is good publicity as far as I'm concerned. All right, that does it for me. I hope I made sense of everything. I hope I didn't forget anything. This is a big day for the history of this franchise. This is one of the moments. You write it down, you remember it. T. Jamar locked up for the next 4 years in Cincinnati. T through 28, Jamar and Joe through 29. This is a big, big, big deal for this franchise. And now it falls on Duke Tobin, Katie and Troy Blackburn, Zach Taylor, and the coaching staff to find the right players in the draft to determine how they build around them. We'll see what happens with Trey Hendrickson. Right now, the Bengals still need an offensive line. They still need pass rushers. Right now, they're mostly the same team that they were a year ago. And that's not going to be good enough because the rest of the league, they're getting better. They're signing players. They're improving the bottom of their roster, the top of their roster, the middle of their roster. The Bengals need to do that as well, or else the wins will be hard to find, even with great players. More on that as the summer goes along. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, X, YouTube, TikTok, whatever you want to call it. It's all at Auty Elmore, AUTYELMORE. You can also find me YouTube. Just search Ball Don't Lie with Auty Elmore. And you can hear me weekdays from noon to 3 on ESPN 1530. We are the official home of the Cincinnati Bengals, by the way. Show is called Cincy 360. I do it with my friend Tony Pike, and it's noon to 3 weekdays on the home of the Bengals, ESPN 1530. That does it for me. Thank you so much for listening to episode number 129 of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. As always, have fun, be safe, go Bucks.